So my name is Lucy Mastellar, and I am one of the research assistants on this amazing project. This summer, I completed my fieldwork in Mobile, Alabama, where I was able to speak with 15 members of the refugee community down there who informed our study. And thank you again so much, Rachel and Jerry, for sharing more about how your respective organizations got involved in this project. And it was a pleasure to work, it's been a pleasure to work with you both throughout the past year. So before we get started on our panel today, I wanted to do a brief overview of our research findings that myself in Mobile and my colleagues in Pittsburgh assessed and found this summer. So all of these findings are compiled in our report that was recently published on our website. I think we can get a link to that in the chat for anyone who's interested, and there's also a link posted in this event page. So for our findings, we found that prior to arrival, refugees in both Pittsburgh and Mobile gained a knowledge of U.S. race relations through school, media, travel, and community conversation. And for our study, we looked at how refugees learn about race before their departure from their home countries, their in-transit experiences on their way to the US, and their post-arrival experiences once resettled within the United States. So the degree of knowledge that refugees have about race and racism, race relations within the US is heavily dependent on each refugee's education level, age, and country of origin. So very context specific. Once in the United States, refugees developed an awareness of US race relations again, through school, media, and community conversation, especially through their own experiences, which our panelists are going to speak more to today. Race is also a highly contextual topic, right? Every culture has extremely different definitions of race and ethnicity. So it's very hard for a lot of new immigrants to the United States to understand these racialized, compartmentalized topics, especially depending on the context of each refugee's home country and how their home country, defines race. Many countries don't even have a definition for race, which makes it all the more hard to understand once in the US. Our final finding of the report also found that despite significant cultural differences between the northern United States, aka Pittsburgh, and the southern United States in Mobile, the study found that refugees' resettlement location does not significantly understand their understanding of race relations or their experiences. Instead, we think that the urban-rural divide is more indicative of how refugees and immigrants will experience racism once in the United States. So I want to go ahead and get started with our amazing panel today. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I am going to briefly introduce each one of you, and then we can get started with our questions. So I'd first like to introduce Sohrab Saljooki, who is a graduating student of history and philosophy at Carnegie Mellon University. His research focuses on history and refugee immigration policy. Sohrab was born in New York to Afghan refugee parents, and he currently resides in Pittsburgh, where he works with the Hello Neighbor Network and worked alongside our team in Pittsburgh last summer. Sohrab plans to study law after completing his undergraduate education. Next, I'd like to introduce Moses Muhabao, who was my colleague and case informer in Mobile this summer. Moses fled the Democratic Republic of the Congo with his family, and in 2009, he resettled in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and eventually on to Mobile, Alabama. Next, we have Kay Clow, who is the executive director of the Midtown Utica Community Center in Utica, New York. Kay and her family moved to Utica as refugees in 2004 due to the civil war in the country. Kay has a BA in anthropology from Mount Holyoke College, and as executive director of the Midtown Utica Community Center, Kay works with volunteers and oversees the organization's finances, maintenance, and headquarters. Kay recently received or was named a Woman of Distinction by the New York State Assembly. So congratulations, Kay. And she's dedicated to community engagement and is currently pursuing a master's degree in information design and technology at SUNY Polytechnic Institute. Finally, we have Hawa Juma, who is also involved at the Midtown Utica Community Center in Utica, New York. Hawa is Somali Bantu and also arrived in the US in 2004 as a refugee from Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. Hawa has a bachelor's in sociology from SUNY Poly, and she is currently the community outreach director at the Midtown Utica Community Center and is the youth case manager for the Safe School Mohawk Valley in the Utica City School District. Thank you all so much for being here today. I also wanted to thank once again our sponsors who have connected us with these wonderful panelists who have graciously joined us here today. So I wanted to start with my first question, which relates back to our findings. So our findings found that very few refugees knew about race and racism in America before their arrival. Those who did know about race beforehand tended to learn about American racism via word of mouth or by media or their own experiences of discrimination in transit. So I'm curious to learn more about your own experiences. Did you or members of your community know anything about race or what race was before your arrival in the US?
So I can start. For me, I came to the US when I was really young, when I was 7. But before arrival, I had never seen a Black person before in real life. I only seen it on media. And a lot of the people who did NGO service work were white people. And so, like I said, I wasn't exposed to a very diverse group of people. But I do know that media was like a huge thing. I remember one very popular show that a lot of people were watching around that time revolved around a princess. And she, in order for her to fall in love with the prince, he had to transform. And initially he was ugly and he was, before he transformed, he was Black. He had an afro, red lips. That was a prince. And then after he transformed into a desirable person for her, he transformed into a guy with straight hair, light skin. So although I had never seen Black people from that show, my understanding was like, okay, darkness as undesirable and white as beautiful and desirable. And in addition to that, I grew up most of my childhood in Thailand, and it's very much divided based on class. And so I noticed that people who are considered lower class or people who are poorer tended to be darker skin color because they worked on the farm, they worked outdoors. And so that's very much associated with people who are lower class. And then those who were lighter skin in the society tended to be more Thai people who were who had lighter skin, and they worked in more white collar jobs. So there's also that class divide.
With my experience when it comes to race, coming from Kakuma refugee camp, all I saw was people who looked like me. So, being a 6-year-old coming to the United States and then seeing my first white person, that was a huge culture shock for me. So, because over there, we're not going based off of race because everyone looks the same. Is usually by different, not different, but different tribes rather than race. So that was like my experience when it comes to like race, just understanding the whole concept of race is when I came to the United States. I mean, when we were working with the UN, all we saw was white people. So when I was coming here, I thought, okay, America, white. So how Kay just said, she didn't really see Black people or anything like that. And for me, when I associated of coming to the United States, all I can associate it was like, okay, the UN people, everyone that was working with us were white. So I thought coming into the United States, I wasn't going to see any other people but white. I thought my family was going to be the first Black family in the United States. And then once I got here, it was just like, oh, okay, there's a lot of different people here. So that was my experience when it comes to race in the United States.
Yeah, I guess to speak on like my family's experience coming into the United States and living in the United States after, living most of their life in Afghanistan. It's like, I guess before they arrived, I would say that both of my parents were very ethnically and racially insulated. So it's very similar to other people's experiences where it's like most of the people that were around them looked like them and were ethnically related, and there was no real ethnic tension between people in their home country and their hometown. So a lot of what they had to learn about racism came from media, even within their own country. And so learning about American racism, I talked to my father about this a few years ago, and he talked about how American movies were very, very, very important to him as a child. And he, even before coming to the United States, he would recognize American actors and he would recognize directors. And back then, like race wasn't in American media. Obviously, it wasn't really like critically analyzed. A lot of it was very stereotypical. And from media, he sort of got that understanding of the white and Black divide. And coming to the United States, it was very difficult. I guess for both of my parents, it was very interesting, especially coming to New York. It was so ethnically diverse, where it wasn't just white and Black. It was Asian, it was African, it was like Southeast Asian, it was South American, it was Mexican. It was so many different ethnic groups. And so before coming to the United States, they sort of got this understanding of race that didn't really exist. So that's sort of what I can recall.
And as for me, what I recall is what they taught us, because I remember the classes we went through, being a refugee in Uganda or just a refugee in any place, and you're being assigned to go to a certain country. They give you an actual training, and they gave us a lot of training. But unfortunately, most of the training that we've been given, it's not the things that we really needed, or they did not give us the truth about what we needed to know. So no, we did not know about race as racism, but we knew as race, white people. And me personally, from what I had been seeing, everything, we were not taught about even Black people that are in America. They only showed us about the whites that are in America. Just like I said last time when you was in Mobile, they did not tell us about the Mexicans who are building everything in America. They did not tell us about the Black people who are building anything in America, the Asians who are building everything in America. We have not been told about the outsiders who have came in America and built America. That's really the truth. The only thing I expected is I will find only white people. And what we were told over there is you'll be given everything you need. You don't have to take your clothes, your shoes, nothing. Just take what you have on you at that time. Yet that is a lie. So, and that is the reason why we are coming here now, and we are experiencing this racism, simply because as much as I learned it and I've experienced it, there's a lot of people here who need this study right now. There's a lot of people in Africa who need this study, or in Asia, or in Europe, anywhere. Most people who want to become refugees or into refugees, especially coming to America, we are not being told about racism or being told about the other race that are here and the work that they are doing. For if we were being told about all those things, we would actually prepare ourselves better to know exactly what we are coming to do and understand what is our part to play. But we believed, or we thought, that we are going to heaven and we just need to close our hands and relax. Yet that is not America.
Thank you all so much. I think it's really interesting to hear about how this idea that America is an all-white country presents itself within different communities around the world before migrants arrive in the United States. Hawa and Sohrab, I know that you both touched upon how you felt when you interacted with other ethnic and racial groups when you first and your family first arrived in the US. So Kay and Moses, I'm also curious to hear about you and your family's experiences. What was it like the first time you encountered someone in the US who was not, who didn't fit your preconceived idea of who Americans were?
First thing, I want to add on to that last question and just say, right before you actually make it to America, the last 2 months in your country or in your country of your refuge, then that's when we were told about the Black people here. And everything that we were told about the Black people here is negative. So now my interaction with an African-American here comes to your question, what was my interaction with them? My interaction came from what they told me about them here. They told me that they are dangerous for me. They told me that I should not interact with them. They told me that they're the one running all the gangs. They're the one killing everywhere. Everything bad is for the Black people in America. So do not interact. Stay away from the Black people in America. Do not be like them. So that itself, it's a weight on my shoulder that I don't know how to approach this Black person. I don't know how they feel. I don't know how I feel. So my first interaction was surprising and it was amazing. Our place, which we arrived in Baton Rouge, we lived near to a church called Ministry of God. That church gave my father a van in 2 weeks that we were in Baton Rouge. And then a month later, another African American gave my father a small car. With that being said, what we were told about the African American is not what we experienced firsthand. I got other bad experiences, but that was not firsthand. So my interaction were amazing, were great. And Americans who are here, they want to accept you, they want to love you. But that was 12 years ago. Life was also kind of good for Americans, so much so that they could share. Now it's getting harder for them. They don't even know if they have enough for themselves to share with others.
Yeah, I mean, just going based off of what Moses said, I came here at a much younger age. I was like 6 years old. I was thrown into elementary school, and my experience was a little bit different. Being a young girl, coming to the United States and, going through the UN, having to see a lot of white people. And when we came to Utica, I was still seeing like more white people before we got assigned a caseworker to help us. So like being placed in school, the first Black person that I saw, I'm like, oh my God, thank God, my first Black person, like he looks like my brother. I was like really, really excited. But then again, there was no connection there. It's like, I'm African, coming all the way from Africa. I don't understand the English language. All I know is this person looks like me. But then this person is not really, he's not really trying to get to know me, because it's like, okay, you're African, you're not African American. So that was my experience, especially like within school. And I don't know if it's because like we were really, really young, but that's how I experienced like interacting with African Americans. I just thought, oh my God, thank God there's someone that looks like me and that can relate to me, who knows my struggle. But what I didn't understand is he does not speak my language. He does not know my culture. He does not know, like, they don't know anything. So that was my experience.
I would agree with everyone else. Before coming to America, I thought I was just going to be all white people. And I was so shocked at how diverse it was. And honestly, I was just very curious because I just had never seen such a mixed group of people before. And so I do feel like my experience, my previous experiences did play into the stereotypes. So, because when you, like I mentioned before, when you think about the people who worked in the refugee camp, came to do the service work, they're white. And so you're assuming that when you come to America, you're coming to a place where there's a lot of privileged white people. And so I guess that was my sense coming into America. And so although I didn't have negative experiences, I felt like I was mostly curious about the mix. But in addition to that, but I also was wary because of the stereotypes we heard about Black people as being dangerous and criminals. And so some common fears that I heard as a child was a lot of the Korean adults were afraid that their kids would marry somebody Black. And so, and when I go to school, I'm meeting people from all different races, and then we go to school and we learn about the history of racism in America. So like there were all these different experiences that people were telling me, but also other experiences that I'm having at school in different places. And so they were all kind of like, there's a lot of nuance, and so they did not so I was thinking about all these different things. And so my experience, I would say with those experiences, I tended to be more open-minded about who people are and where they come from.
I think those are all amazing points. And Kay, you brought up a point that transitions well into my next question, because you'd mentioned that, you know, your community, a lot of members of your community, you know, maybe don't want Karen youth to marry Black individuals in the US. So I'm curious to know how your community as a whole, you know, sees other ethnicities and races, you know, if American stereotypes are carried over into your community, and if your community like replicates the racism that, you know, and racial norms that they might see once they arrive in America.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of internalized racism within our own communities. So if somebody is darker skinned in the Korean community, they've gotten made fun for it. You know, why are you so dark? And so, and whiteness is very much a desirable trait. And so, you know, my friends, they wanted to have light skin, they wanted you know, long nose. So with us, I think it just it shows up in the form of internalized racism a lot.
To speak on that point of like racial constructions in the United States and how they impact like our communities, this I think is like a really, really important thing. And I think it's something I've noticed a lot growing up in the United States, because I didn't live in Afghanistan like my parents did. Like most of my upbringing is in Canada and the United States, mostly the United States, right? And so I have this understanding of American racism, and I have this education that teaches me about American racism that other people like in my family just didn't have. So like I can see these like I have these opinions about race that family members of mine don't have, and the reaction I have to those things are very, very interesting. Like when you talk about racism, a lot of people who even in the past have told me like the discrimination they faced. Well, if I bring up racism that Afghans experience or Black people experience or Asian Americans experience, like I feel like they'll just regurgitate a lot of the points that a lot of people who question racial narratives talk about. They'll be like, oh, that doesn't really happen a lot. I don't think that's really that important. I don't think race is that important. I would hear my own family members talk about this a lot. And it's very interesting because I would have conversations very similar to the ones we're having right now. We're having these conversations about race, these conversations about ethnicity, and then they turn the heel the other like another day and say a completely different thing. And it's also just a lot of family members do just have normal American racial stereotypes embedded in their minds, especially being in the United States for a very long time. So those conversations I have a lot and they get very difficult for those like contradictory reasons that I brought up.
I agree with the brother Saljooki. I agree with him for sure. And I'm glad that you, even who have not experienced some of the things firsthand, living in Afghanistan, you still can relate with people who are there, who understand it more than even our own families who are here. My point about that is to say, because even my own father, it's there. I feel like we have been so beat up, so much so that it's easy for some of our people, because they see how they came from literally nothing or not having a dream to gaining a little bit. So they now can say, if I did it, you can do it. So much so that now they're just focusing, they're tired. So now they're just focusing on their little family and what they have. And they believe that there's nothing that we can do to change anything. So therefore we don't need to talk about it, because the more we talk about it, the more energy we put in it. Yeah, we're not changing it, but they know it's there. It's just that they are really tired, and they know that the system is controlled by not people who have love in their hearts. No, they have God in their hearts. So therefore, they just like, let's just let it go. Let's just let it go. But I'm glad, because as long as we don't let it go, we can change and pave the future to be different, because the racism is here, is affecting my people here, is affecting my people there. And the worst of the racism is not even physical racism. Mental racism can be worse, such as some of our people who could be doing so much there, but they believe that they cannot dream until they make it to America or to another country. That itself is racism without knowing. That itself is hating yourself without knowing, hating your country without knowing. I come from a place whereby everyone bleaches their skin for the sake of being white or being light. We've been affected subconsciously, consciously, inside, outside. Is bigger than just this topic. It has gone farther than what we can imagine. But I'm thankful for everyone and these topics.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear how, racism has expanded itself beyond the US and has, even infiltrated, other communities around the world.
Thank you.
So that's a super interesting point, Moses. And, in terms of what you were saying, how a lot of members of your community just say, hey, we're here now in the US, let's just let the racism go. Let's not think about it or focus on it. I'm curious to know the current racial issues and racism that your community also experiences in the US, and how your community has I guess found coping mechanisms to address that racism that they face.
This question is to me?
Anyone is free
No.
to answer.
Me personally, I have been someone, just like the sister Kay said, open-minded. I've been very open-minded. So therefore, that's why I've not kept the negative in my head. But when I moved to Mobile, Alabama, at the high school that I went to, I found myself being the peacemaker, simply because I kind of understood the Americans and I understood all my Africans. Before I got to the school, my Africans were fighting every day on the bus with other people. At the school, there was a lot of tension. But what hurts me is, as I'm here at Dwell Mobile and I come here, last time I was here, I still hear the same things happening. I've been out of high school 10 years now, but the same things are again happening. So what are we doing to really address those things? In my community, nothing yet.
Yeah, like for example, like for us here in Utica, a lot of the things that we've been dealing with is especially like with our youth, and it's not the youth, it's not the ones who weren't, it's not the one that were not like born here in the United States. The ones who were born in the United States are the ones who are like having almost like this identity crisis of trying to find where they belong. And a lot of them tend to go in such like different directions. And a lot of them, like, especially, I'm going to use like my brother for an example. My brother is, he wasn't born in the United States, but, he doesn't have an accent. He looks like every other African-American boy. So if my brother was like ever to be stopped by a police, like, they're not going to know like, oh, he's not probably from this country or doesn't really understand all these different things. They're going to treat him like every other African man in the United States. But for me, being a hijabi, being Black, they're going to start asking me more questions because I have the hijab on. And all this just to say, like, there's been so much change when it comes to like being first generation refugee, and then having the new generation who were born in the United States. It's just really, really different, because it's like we're experiencing the traumas that our parents faced and everything that they went through to, like, they left their country because of war. And now we're experiencing where our boys they look like every other African American boy, and they're being targeted. So it's like, it kind of creates this hard thing where it's like, okay, we left our country to have a better life, but now it's like we're being targeted, So it's really hard.
For me, I think I like to tie it to just thinking about where refugees are resettled. So a big issue that Utica is facing is there's a lot of lead in these homes, and that really detrimentally affects the development of a child. So I ask myself, like, if people wanted to help refugees, if people really wanted to help people, why are we being, resettled in homes that are contaminated with lead, where our children are not safe to grow up in, and thinking about working conditions, low pay, long hours, like, and our elders, they're old, they've been through a lot. And so for me, just thinking about where we are resettled, Utica is known to be very poor, known to be a lot of diverse refugee population, housing issues with housing and healthcare. And so when you have refugees coming into these areas that are, designated as impoverished, and with a diverse, so refugees come into Utica and there's already a lot of diverse Black people, Hispanic people here. I feel like it is very much a prime ground for violence. And every year, like as Hawa mentioned, like we're facing issues around gun violence, and there's a lot of tension between the Asian and the Black youth. And so when you're putting a whole bunch of people who need access to services, need support, and there's a lack of it, it's just really hard. And so for me, like, You know, I like to ask myself, would refugees still be valued if we weren't valued for our labor and what we can contribute to society? Can we be seen as just in our humanity?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
like a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hawa,
No,
go ahead.
no, it's okay. Yeah, no, like it's really true. Like, you know, being like growing up in the area of Utica, like our parents, it doesn't matter how much they're getting paid. They will work hard. Even if you tell them you need to take a break, they will not take a break because they're like, you know, we're in the United States, we have to work hard. Like Moses said, they come from nothing. So the little that they have, that's everything for them. And they just look into like, you know, taking care of their families and all these, but the thing is they're being taken advantage of. Like so many of them were doctors, nurses, all these high level things, but now they come here, it's just like, you can't be a doctor, you can't be a nurse, you can't do anything that you did back at home because it's not valued. So as a refugee, it's like, if you want to be that, you have to start all over again.
I actually wanted to comment on what you just talked about, Hawa, about like coming from, I guess, education and knowledge and having all this experience and expertise, but it doesn't apply in the United States. That's a very, very, very common experience in my family. The way I would describe my family is that I think my family is very smart. I think they're very educated. Um, and the discussions I have with them are extremely enlightening. But coming to the United States, they just had to work like regular minimum wage jobs or be exploited like under minimum wage, especially if they're undocumented. That did happen to a few of my family members as well, because a lot of the documentation of their education just like wasn't really accepted. It wasn't seen as valid. It wasn't seen as nearly as valued as something like an American education. And so, like you said, my mother had to start from zero. Like as of right now, she works and she still doesn't have a GED, but she has a college education from an Afghan university. So I think that is like one of the, I think for my family especially, that hurt us a lot. Um, and I don't know. Yeah, I think that was just our experience coming in.
Thank you all for sharing that. That's honestly something I'd never personally considered, and I think that that's a really important form of structural xenophobia, to mention, you know, just here in the US, how we don't recognize other educations as being, you know, legitimate outside of, you know, a westernized degree. So thank you so much for sharing that. I also am curious if you think, kind of bouncing to education, do you think someone's education level could impact the way that they understand race and racism? Or do you think understanding of race is universal, just regardless of a person's education?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, sorry. Yes, I just for me, like I like to compare the education that I got in college versus the education that I got in the public school system. Like before going to college, I thought, you know, the idea of racism was that it very much was in the past, civil rights era. So now that you have all these laws passed, and it's illegal to be racist, like it's in the past, and so like just leave it in the past. But going into college, I really had a more holistic understanding of how racism worked, like understanding why the issues around the race tensions that we have today are structured by various historical circumstances. And so I don't think, so I took anthropology in college, I took sociology classes, and which really dug into like various issues around race in healthcare, race in housing, and how like racism really kind of is structured into various systems. And I would have never understood it if I had not gone to college and got that education. So I just feel like it's so important for people to be able to have that understanding. And I feel like our public school system needs to do a better job of teaching kids about various histories and not just a westernized point of view of history.
Yeah, like Kay said, when it comes to race and racism, like, you know, coming to the United States at a young age, you know, the only time we learned about, especially like Black people, it was during February, you know, it was always in February. And it was always like surface stuff. Oh, this is what happened. And then Martin Luther King came, and then that was that. But then again, still, even though like I was still shocked, being a Black person, I was shocked. I'm like, oh my goodness, like these people look like me and they experience this kind of racism. In my head as a 7-year-old, I'm like, hopefully I'm not next. You know what I mean? I even like started to question like my mom. I'm like, hey, like this is what we learned in school. This is what used to happen to Black people, and the Black people in the books, they look like us. Like, you know, as a young person, I'm asking these questions because I'm like, what are you doing here if this is what happened to people who look like us? And then as I got older and I went to college, and then I started learning more, like I started taking classes like race and gender, and started reading, and all these different things started I was like, oh my, I was really like mind blown from the things that I've read and the things that I've seen. Is like in elementary school, yeah, they tell you about slavery, but they don't really go in depth about it. And I was like even like more shocked, and I started looking at started looking at the American system really weird, because it's like they really don't talk about it. It's like, oh, it's in the past, it's over, it's not happening again. But really it continues to happen. It's still happening, and you see it a little bit every single day.
I wanted to speak on this education point actually, because I think this is really important. I think the thing that really solidified it for me when I was growing up, like being a toddler or and growing up into my like preteens, was learning about histories of racism for other groups, learning about anti-Asian racism, learning about anti-Black racism in the United States. That's what really solidified it for me. But I think what helped compound it and helped it turn it into something real and something genuinely like inside of me, where I'm like, I feel like I am anti-racist. I understand like the experience of all these people, was living and talking with people of other races. And this is, I think, the best way you can see this disconnect is with my parents, because my parents don't have the education to learn about the histories of racism, to learn about the histories of all these different ethnicities, but they have the experience. Because coming into New York, coming into Canada, whatever it may be, so many different ethnicities they had to work with. They've never ever even seen them, right? A lot of us even in this discussion have talked about how coming into the United States, there's certain ethnicities that you haven't even seen in your entire life. That's what the experience was for my family. But you had to come here and instantly learn, instantly work with them, instantly talk to them, instantly, I guess, become friends and peers with them. And I think for my parents, that's what formed something like that. Before, I think they were like really racist. I think growing up, they were really racist. Coming to the United States, they were really racist. But over time, I feel like they've eased and become very, very, very tolerant over time, because they've had to live and work with these people and talk with these people and become friends with these people. The best example I can give is that my mother, my entire mother's side of the family is obviously Muslim, and a lot of them are anti-Semitic. I've had discussions with them, lots of anti-Semitic things that they've said to me, really bad stuff. But one of my best friends in the entire world growing up, he was a Jewish kid, and his mother was Jewish. But my mom kind of saw past that, and she didn't even say anything to me ever about, oh, you can't be friends with a Jewish person. I can't be friends with a Jewish person. But over time, one of her best friends was my friend's mom. And one of my best friends was that friend. And so we sort of created this system where we would talk about our experiences. They talked about their experiences being Jewish in the United States, and we talked about our experiences being Muslim. And so I think it's back to the original. I just want to like round it out. I think it's a mix of two. I think you need both education and experience. I think just education is not enough. And I think just experience is not enough. I think a mix of the two is the absolute best.
Yes, I agree with everyone. Thank you for sharing that. But I just want to go and say that when it comes to the education did give me to see a lot. But also education can make you feel belittled. I went to school and I believed that I was just a C student because of grades. And I was comfortable with that, but I never put in so much time in homeworks. I was always busy doing my soccer. So I believed and I accepted being a C student. So I did not realize how smart I am. Now, when I went to college, the way I realized I was smart is when I sat with other people who were having dialogues and they actually told me, you are a smart person. That's when I realized I was smart. My point about that is I go back to the sister Juma says she has a brother who can and looks just like other Americans here or African Americans. My point about this is, as we are having so many immigrants who have gone into American kindergarten, pre-K, elementary, middle school, high school, without actually being educated, it's going to be dangerous for us. As much as, yes, it's good that we were educated in college and we received the knowledge, this knowledge needs to be shared more in high school and lower grades, simply because once they realize that the life that they were promised, they ran from wars and they were supposed to be educated, and now they actually will end up being the bottom of the list of the America, and they have to sweep the floors of America. It's going to backfire on America in the long run, because we have so many immigrants who are into the American education system and they're not being educated. That's my point.
That's a very interesting point as well. I think, you know, as Sohrab also had said, you know, education and experience are both incredibly important, you know, in the development and understanding of American race relations. So Sohrab, I'm interested in the point that you brought up, you know, how your mother forged a relationship via experience and had a very positive interaction with her Jewish friend, which, you know, in turn helped her break down some of those stereotypes that she held. I'm curious to know, in our own study, we found that several participants had negative interactions with the Black community in the US just through their experiences, mostly living in low-income housing. And I'm wondering how we can also help people overcome any negative experiences they might have with a certain group of people, to understand that, you know, these are individual people. You can't categorize, you know, one experience and generalize it to an entire class of people. So I'm wondering how you think your community could overcome negative experiences that they might have with other groups, or if there have been examples of this that you've witnessed in your community.
Yeah, the whole discussion about experiences, I think, is really important. And what you've brought up, I think I've actually observed before, where we have these one-off experiences that people talk about to justify a sort of stereotype that has been implemented into their head, whatever it may be. Like, the best example I can give is that I had a family member give very, very anti-Black statements about, like, the stereotype about Black people being criminals. And because the example they gave was because of a news story, local news story in the newspaper, right? And so I had to have a discussion with them, because this person is Afghan. They've talked about the discrimination they faced as a result of their ethnicity before. So I had to kind of create that parallel. It's like, well, you know how it feels to be profiled as a result of your ethnicity and your race. I can right now find, like, me growing up, I've been called terrorist. I've been called all the, like, anti-Muslim things. So have my family members. They've all been called the same thing. It's like, I can find an Afghan quote unquote terrorist, right? But that doesn't mean I can't just point at that and say, oh, look, I'm proven right because I think all Afghans are terrorists or whatever, right? So I sort of had to have the discussion with that person, with my family member. And I think those are the most effective things, where you sort of create a parallel, because I think it's a little bit, you know, cliche, but it's like, we're all very alike in our experiences. I think like we can find a lot of parallels between our experiences. So I think highlighting them for people to make it like clear that it's like, look, maybe we shouldn't judge because how would it feel like if it were for you, right? That's how it worked in my experience. But if other people have different experiences or different methods, I would love to hear it because that's the only one I've ever been able to think of.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? I know it's a very complicated, hard question to answer.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, the question was just about, how if someone in your community has a negative interaction with someone, who is of a different race or ethnicity, and then they use that experience to kind of generalize to an entire population of people. How do you think communities can overcome that and work to break down those stereotypes?
Like, for example, I know like Kay and I were talking about it, like creating, like inviting different organizations, because each organizations have such diverse people who work for them, and teaching them about the different cultures that live in the city of Utica, and telling them like, hey, these are the people who are in your daily life every single day. This is the Somali Bantu community. This is the Bosnians. This is the Mexicans. Like just educating people, I feel like will like just having like just educating them will, or like a culture competency class or a course just to help everyone understand, okay, this is this person's culture and this is what they believe. This is how they live their life, and just introducing them to each other. And I feel like that's the best way to go about it, just bringing everyone together.
I work at a community center, so I'll tie it back to like the idea of providing people with a safe space to have these conversations. And obviously, every single one of us are seeing and experiencing these various issues that are occurring in the US, and we're thinking about them, and they're really complex and they're not easy to understand. But if you provide us a safe space for people to ask those questions and meet new people and learn about these issues, I think that can go a long way, having that safe space. And the thing is, there is not a lot of safe spaces for people to be. There's not a lot of community centers out there. So I think that having these safe spaces where just like community spaces where people can come in community with each other, just have fun, make new friends, connect with people, other people, connect with new ideas. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and something we just recently did here in Utica with the Midtown Utica Community Center is having things like International Night and inviting all these different cultures who live in the city of Utica and inviting everyone else to come. And then now everyone, not only are you learning about the country, you're tasting their food and you're interacting with them. They're showing you their clothes, their fashion, like all these different things. I feel like that is what really like helped us branch out to other communities here here in Utica.
I'm glad about this question, but as I try to think, what really would I do if I was in a position to try to make something come together like that? And it's really hard to change it because it's all in mind, it's all mental. Imagine someone driving a car. Imagine how people feel when they see a police behind them when they're driving, even when they're not speeding. Most of the time, people get shook unless you have a police friend or you have a police in your family. Then you have understood that police are there to do their job and they correct what is right, what is wrong, and they do whatever they're supposed to do what's right. But my point of that is, it's really more just like Sister Juma said, having nights or days that it's just for that specifically. And I've tried to think what other what group has done that, or where have I had that? I've not had anything like that here in a long time. The only thing I've had something like that, it was when it was like a market thing, and they made the communities come out and sell whatever is like their cultural things in downtown. And that happened one time since I've been here for the last 11 years. So really, it's more like just creating a safe place, like Sister K said, and those nights whereby we just is specifically for people coming together, communities, different kind of people just come and eat together, laugh together, and get to know each other. And I don't see what group is willing to just start that. But if that's possible, that is the only way to really help the things that I see, especially in my community.
I think those are all great points, and that that really transitions us well to, you know, what we hope to produce with our next phase of research. We want to use this research, you know, to create informed racial educational programming for all immigrants in the U.S. And I think these components that we talked about, you know, combining education, immersion in a culture, and exposure and interaction, these are all incredibly important components to include in curriculum going forward. So my last question before we open it up to the audience, just as a side, audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen to type your questions, and then we can ask them to our amazing panelists. So before we move on to audience questions, I wanted to end with, you know, as we move forward with our next phase of research, and try to produce curriculum that can help immigrants learn about these incredibly sensitive issues. What is something either you or your community should have or would have wanted to know about racial dynamics in the US before their arrival?
I would say like educating them about the different people who are in the United States, because they do, like when I was coming here and like with the UN, we really didn't know about all these different people who live here. We thought it was just going to be, since the UN was mostly white people, we just thought we were going into a country that was just filled with white people. And then you can imagine coming into a country and you're seeing all these different people and you're just like, oh, okay. But I feel like educating them about US history, educating them about what really goes on in America, and most importantly, letting them know, I feel like letting them know, for example, when it comes to education, that whatever degree that they have in their country might not be valid here in America, all these different things, so they have a choice as well. Yes, a lot of us like a lot of us are like escaping war and all these different things, but some might be like, okay, like for example, some of my family decided not to come to the United States. They said, okay, you guys go to Kakuma refugee camp. My other side of my family went to Tanzania. So it's like just giving them options and not just painting this beautiful picture of America, because it's like they're still going to struggle. They're living paycheck to paycheck and it's hard. So they need to tell that to the refugees before they bring them here.
Yeah, I would have more or less said the exact same thing, where you really have to tell people about the true diversity of the United States, that it's not a simple white and black dichotomy in the United States, that there is a wealth and breadth of people that you will meet from backgrounds, from countries that you never even knew existed. You'll talk to people who follow religions that you didn't even know existed, and that you're gonna have to learn a lot. That's sort of what I would have wished to have told my family before they came.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. Kind of disrupting this romanticized idea of America, and really giving people a better understanding of how complex the race relations can be, and also, yeah.
I think I agree with everything, and I would wish and I want people to understand and to know about race. And simply, I say that because I feel like most people who experience those racism, or most people who are not happy with the race here, are simply the people who did not know what will happen. Because if you knew the racism, then you will know how to approach people or how to not approach people. That could stop a lot of altercations from coming forward. But also when it comes to just life and people being successful, I really admire these two cultures. One is the Asian community, Asian culture. I have seen what they have done. But the second, and this one I admire them more, is the Arabian communities. The Arabian communities, most of them before they come to America, they literally have been taught by their own people what America is about. They're being told, when you're coming here, it's only work that you're coming here to do. So make sure that you work for this long period of time so that you can set yourself for this much period of time. So if that's also another thing that needs to be focused more about, telling us and teaching us what we're going to do and what we'll be doing as we come here, showing us that we are coming to contribute on the taxes. And if we do not contribute for the taxes, then just like Sister K said, will we be valued as refugees or as immigrants? Yet if we understood who we were and our role to play, and we actually played, we could be and we will be more successful, and then we can actually help more of our people who are there. Because me personally, I can say that the time that I came in America to the time that I went to college, that's my first 6 years in America, I literally went to sleep mentally. So I hope that people who are coming to America can be taught so that their first years in America will not be wasted, because it takes time for you to wake up in America.
Absolutely. And thank you all for your incredible insight and also advice for practitioners who might be watching this panel. I think these are issues that are very important, and that hopefully all practitioners and Americans, can use as they work to better understand, the day-to-day challenges, especially regarding race and racism that new immigrants in the United States face. So I wanted to open the floor to a couple questions that we've received. The first one it's not a question, but a comment from an audience member who Sohrab is also acknowledging that they had a similar experience as your mom with her family as well. So the next question is about how we can implement racism history in the current US education system. So I suppose this question is how we can better understand the history of racism in the United States, especially within, immigrant education programming.
Well, for me, I'll say it's possible, as much as people think it's not possible. It's possible with love. My point is, I have seen just 2 days ago, I've seen someone buy a $2 million house. It's overlooking on the water. But then they have to demolish the whole house. And I say, why? Just rent it out and make some money, blah, blah, blah. They say the foundation is bad. So my point about that is, how do we put how do we teach about racism in America? It's really by breaking down the foundations, as bad as that sounds. The foundations that we are sitting on as for our education have not been true, and they're not right. So really, it's just about us being honest. So if we can be honest, then everything else can come in play. But I'm not sure if we are really ready to be honest, because we still have so many people who are benefiting, not just people, but families that are benefiting from this racism that is happening.
And when it comes to like a lot of refugees, I'm not like, especially coming from Africa, and if you tell us about how Black Americans are being were being sold as slaves, I don't think any Black person is gonna wanna come to the United States. You know what I mean? I feel like that's the other reason why race isn't really being taught to the refugees who are coming here. So it's like it's not really being explained. And sometimes US history, the history is ugly, is bad, you know? So of course, no, you're bringing a group of people from this continent, and you're not going to tell them, okay, so this is what happened in America, this is what we did, this is how we did. They're not going to do that. You know, nobody's going to want to come.
I agree with both of you. In terms of when Moses, you mentioned breaking down the foundation. I think critical race theory is such an important, gives you such an important foundation with which to understand current race relations and how history impacts the way we view the world now and the way we relate with one another. I think it's really important to read books and provide teachings about Black activists and people who historically have not been given the platform to teach history from, you know, their community's perspectives, because the education right now is very much westernized, Eurocentric.
Yeah, my next question is about location. You know, during our study, we spoke with refugees in both Pittsburgh and Mobile. And even though our study indicated that, you know, refugees had very similar experiences across both cities, I'm also curious to know if you think, you know, your location where you first came to in the US affected how you understood race and racism, or if you think that, you know, maybe race is something that's generally understood the same across the board in the US. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the concept that race is like universal in the United States, like it's understood the same. I think that's I don't think that's true at all. I think the location you're in matters a lot for how racial dynamics work. And especially for how racist or like how racist someone can really be. I think it's actually location dependent. So the example with my family is that they come from like Afghanistan to the United States, right? And both of them came to more urban areas, very dense populations. And with urban areas and dense populations, if you look at demographic studies, you can see that it's very, 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 very diverse. Like I think United States is like significantly white, but cities are significantly less white relative to the broader population of the United States. Lots of people of color and a lot of diversity. And like I said before, when it comes to interacting with people of different races, that helps you really break down some of your preconceived notions you have about race. So literally just by the act of, you know, living and growing up and developing your career and developing your family inside of a city relative to, let's say, like a rural or a suburban area, I think that can impact the way you interact with other people significantly.
Yeah, Moses, not to put you on the spot here, but I know for our report, you had a really interesting take on this. If you wouldn't mind sharing what your thoughts were about, you know, racism in the North versus the South, I think that would be really interesting to add to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Well, I think, brother, what he said is really correct and it's true. But I also believe, just like me, coming to Mobile was better for us than staying in Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge, I was in laundromat where somebody robbed me $1. $1 is nothing, but it's just the fact that that happened. It shook me. It scared me in America. But would have I experienced that if I was in a different kind of neighborhood? Probably not. Did the Catholic Social Service knew where they were putting us? Yes, they did. Sister K also mentioned something like that. They know exactly where they take us to. So why did they take us to those communities if they want to better our lives? We lived in a place where it's called Nicholson Drive in Baton Rouge, 2 miles away from LSU, the stadium. There was gunshots at least every other night. Ambulance were coming to pick people up every time. So when it comes to the violence and all the racism, yes, a community definitely does make a difference. Now, when it comes to what you said, if I could share, and my thoughts about that is, there is racism in the South, but the racism in the South is not as much as the racism in the North. That's my opinion. And best of that is, the South is still a place whereby, that's why I love Mobile. Mobile is home for me. I am like a truck driver. I've been in every other state, and every other state that I've been in, you do not just speak to people as much as you can speak to people in the southern states. In southern states, more people are open to have a conversation than in the northern states. But it has been stereotypically spoken that we are racist in the South. But yes, because we were the last one to have the slaves, you can say that. But the community, the people that are here are actually the community of people who want to know one another. It's actually a community of people that when they talk, they realize that we have more in common than we have out of common. With that being said, I feel like there's more racism actually there in the North, simply because it's a place that everyone is on their own. Just the weather itself in the North makes you to be racist without knowing. Because in the North, if anyone is broken on the side of the road, because there's snow there, you will not just stop and help them. There's so many traffic, you don't just stop and help anyone. No one will call on anyone in the North because there's so many people and the cities are just filled with everything. And everyone is expected to work and put in so many hours, because if you want a job, here in Mobile, you might look for a job and not find it, but in the North, there's jobs everywhere. They've put people in industries, so much so that people don't have time for themselves or for their communities. So that was my thoughts about that there's actually more racism in the North than in the South. Because in the South, I can speak to somebody, say hello, and they'll say hello. That's not in the North. You say hello, somebody will look at you and look on the other side. I've experienced that.
Yeah, thank you, Moses, for sharing and for allowing me to put you on the spot for that question.
It's great.
I wanted to close out, because we are running out of time, with one more question from the audience that we received, which is about social media, which I think is a great question, because obviously with the rise of social media, as we also found in our report, people all over the world are more readily able to access American media, see American news stories about, a lot of the, like for instance, the Black Lives Matter protests. That's something our informants had remarked that helped them understand racism in the US by seeing those posts from abroad before they arrived. So this question asks if you think social media has made an impact on the effectiveness of American media, and if you think that the media that the US exports to other countries has an effect on how others see Americans. I know some of you mentioned seeing Americans in movies as well before you arrived, so thought that could be an interesting question to end with.
I would say, like, with social media, it's always, I think any discussion on social media, I feel like somebody has to mention that it's a double-edged sword, where it's, you can get more publicity for good causes, but you could also get more publicity for bad causes. So as for how America's perceived worldwide with social media, I mean, with BLM, that's a very good example of like a very good cause going worldwide and literally causing like parallel movements. I know there were parallel movements, in 2020 in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in all the African countries, in Australia, like name the country, there was a movement started as a result of this social media craze. But also like the perception of America can be very negative as a result of social media. So an example that's unfortunately currently like unraveling is with shooting violence, gun violence. I know friends in different countries, that's almost their entire perception of the United States is like this gun crazed place. So, and they almost always get that from social media because on social media, this is discussed a lot. So I think it's a very difficult question, but I think more or less it's like, if more or less like, it just depends on what's popular in the United States culturally, what's culturally happening in the United States at a certain time. That's sort of what's gonna go. And if we want America to look good, let's hope it's a good thing. I guess that's my only take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I said, like in the beginning, when it comes to like the idea of knowing what's going on here, like back in the early 2000s, technology wasn't really a big thing. A lot of people didn't really have access to it, you know? But now, since we have access and a lot of people back home have access and they see what's going on in America, and a lot of them, the things that they're seeing are not good things about America. So they're like, no, we really don't want to be in America based off of what they see with Black Lives Matter, with all these different things politically, all these different things. That's making them like say, okay, that's how the United States is. That's not a place that we want our family to be in. We would rather stay here and struggle and be where we're at in our own country than come here based off of what they see on social media, you know? So that's where it goes back, like education. Maybe if we were educated and understood what was going on in the United States, how many refugees would accept to come here, you know? And then now with social media, it's exposing a lot of that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Just from my personal experiences of living abroad, when I was teaching in Ghana, the one question that students had about America was, are they racist in America? And then when I was in Japan, I was teaching in Japan, the one question that my host family had asked me was, why is there so much shooting in America? So that really, those questions really stood out to me. So I think that the media, with social media, people are having access to so different points of information, and I think that's important as well.
Yes, I agree. And I definitely love social media and what it has done. Best of allowing people to get the information that are out here that they could not get. But unfortunately, I am scared of the social media based on what I've experienced personally. Now, what did I experience and what do I mean that I'm scared? I am scared because I feel as if there are people who already knew that we'll be having these conversations. So therefore, they are also behind social media if we know it or we don't know it. What's my point? My point is what everyone has said. Violence is the number one thing that's selling on social media. If it's about violence, they want it to go viral. I believed and I thought TikTok was for the people. Everyone in America says, everyone who's in the government, they say ban the TikTok because it's giving people too much information. But unfortunately, TikTok is not completely what we have thought or we believe it is. I want us to keep on studying these social medias of ours. What did I experience? I posted a violent message and they let it go. I posted a very peaceful message by Prof. Pluo Lumumba, and the title of the message is saying that Africa will be recolonized in the next 25 years if they do not come back together. The topic that is teaching people knowledge, and it was blocked. I posted it over and over, it was blocked. My point about that is they don't want a peaceful message to go. They don't want people to come together. They don't want people to really be educated. They don't, that's my point. I love social media, but I have been heartbroken the fact that a peaceful message that has no cuss word, everything you would love to hear has been blocked, but they want the violence to go viral. So I hope people can keep on thinking about that.
Thank you, Moses. I think that unfortunately holds true. Violence is always going to be the thing that catches everyone's eye and draws in the attention. So I think that's really important going forward, that we understand that and the way that affects communities outside of the US and their perception of racist phenomena in the United States. So I just wanted to thank you all again for taking the time to participate. You all have brought up such insightful comments, and we really appreciate you sharing your experiences and, sharing more what it's like to be, a newcomer in the United States, especially within your own respective communities. So on behalf of the Refugees in Towns team, I just wanted to thank you all again. And with that, we are also going to open the floor for some questions for Rachel and Jerry. So if we could get them back on the screen, there were a couple questions about their presentation as well. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we had a question from an audience member in the other room. So if the audience members want to ask their question, that would be great.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? My name's David. I'm the State Department Fellow at Fletcher this academic year. And one of the things that in my role as an overseas refugee coordinator for the State Department, I had the chance to sit in on a number of cultural orientation sessions from refugees from a variety of different education levels, different nationalities, et cetera. And I know the State Department through one of the refugee agencies, IRC, has poured a ton of resources into this core resource, right? One thing I'm very interested in is whether grassroots organizations of the United States, such as members of the Hello Network, are those resources useful? Are they being used? And maybe what are the gaps in terms of the issues you talked about in your research? Because I know that one of your recommendations was that there need to be more resources, there need to be more trainings, more information. I'm wondering whether the existing resources can be built upon, or are you envisioning separate resources because the existing ones really aren't meeting needs? So, thank you.
A great question. So the core trainings, I'll be interested, Jerry, for you to weigh in on this too, but certainly for resettlement agencies, they're using the core training. So that's, the first 90 days, everyone's going through those. And what we understand about those trainings is that they include information about discrimination and share with people you can't be discriminated against because of your race or religion. But beyond that, there's not a lot of other context in those like required trainings that everyone receives through the resettlement process. And then any other training, and I don't know, Jerry, if you do any of the core training or pieces of it or supplements from it yourself. My sense is that most of the nonprofits in our network might be doing, specific to their local community training and education, if anything. So I do think that the core training is a really logical place to build because everyone is coming through that training program.
Yeah, I'll jump on and add my insights. That's a great question and a good connection because we had talked about that, Rachel and I, even with the core trainings. And I'll say personally, I have years ago, I was maybe more familiar with it, and I think it's been updated recently. And it's on my list of things I need to do soon is go back through it. Somebody in our office uses it, and we're starting to bring on a couple people because we're starting to partner with the state to provide some services. And that's one of the things. We haven't made it an official requirement yet, but I've sent it out to all of the people, like just a few of the people that we've been bringing on to say, you need to go through this, you need to look at this. So I can get back with you in a few weeks and tell you my exact feedback about all of it. But from what I've heard, it's a great resource. Now, I'm not sure what is in there. Like Rachel, you're saying, like, I'm not sure if there is anything in there about specifically about race. And what I think, and I know we talked about training from a couple different standpoints. And I think having sat in interviews with Lucy this past summer, I was very surprised to hear people saying, oh no, I mean, exactly what that panel just said. Like, I wasn't aware there was any other, and so I do think given that, even if they do get that core training, or if those people in some way got some form of that, there would be needing to be some amendments made to it. But I do think it may be a really great place to put those.
It's one other thing I'll say. It's, it's sort of challenging to think about where in the process to put a training like this, because I know Hello Neighbor happens to also be a resettlement agency. So we are working with people from the day they land here in the US for those first 90 days on like housing, education, healthcare, finding a job. And all of those things take a lot of time and energy and like mental capacity, and it's a lot to learn really fast. So I don't know that I have a good answer, but just, I do know that our resettlement team and the folks in those first 90 days are very busy and taking in a lot of new information. So I don't know if there's a time before that, time after that, if it's like, probably it's a longer term training and ongoing conversations.
I guess I can add just a little bit in there, and because I think that's exactly right, Rachel. When I started like 8 years ago, we did not, this is our first like state partnership where we're going to be working with people immediately after arrival. Previous to this, we did the 90 days, and it was longer than that, a lot. Most of our clients have been here now for years, but the first program we ran was an extended cultural orientation. But at the time, I didn't know that's what it was. It was more, we developed it from my thought of, it seems like all of the people that we're meeting with need to know similar things, and then when we found the cultural orientation resources that I think are through CORE, we were like, this is amazing because this is what they need. But we were having people come, and we did them as classes, and we served a meal. And so we tried to make it very community based. But we were seeing people, they'd been here for 3 years at the time and they were getting value out of the things that we were just reteaching from the cultural orientation, and so I do kind of think they have so much they're dealing with in their first months after arrival that, not that it's like, oh, we shouldn't mention this, but I think just thinking through the timeline of maybe some of this stuff could be repeated later after they have gotten their feet under them a little bit, or have experienced something, I think there's value in thinking through how to repeat some sort of educational offerings so they can take advantage of them at whatever point they feel ready to do that too.
All right. Well, with that, Rachel and Jerry, thank you both so much again for being with us today and for your continued work and support on this project. We really couldn't have done it without your collaboration and dedication as well. So at this time, we are going to take a quick lunch break. And our program is going to resume at 1:30 with Dr. Murrow presenting her research. And then after that, we are going to move into our practitioner panel.